Welcome to another edition of Meadow Lab's Addiction and Wellness. We have with us once again our special guest, Reverend Jonathan Gray, who is Executive Director for Adult and Teen Challenge. And just as a brief recap, tell us a little bit of the history of the Adult and Teen Challenge.
Well, Adult and Teen Challenge has been around for almost 60 years. It started in New York and spread all over the country and eventually all over the world. And it's a one-year residential addiction recovery program, gender-specific. Some facilities for men, some are for women. Our particular facility is for men. And we take them for that 1 year. We help them through their addiction process and their core triggering processes and help them become productive citizens back in society.
So in this conversation about addiction and recovery, and I like to focus more so on the recovery aspect, we're going to be moving a little bit further into the mechanics of that process, if you would. Okay. So for our first question for you today is, what are the early warning signs of addiction, and how can they be addressed before they escalate?
The early warning signs, are one, a change in behavior, a drastic change in behavior. If this person if they're up, they're light, and they're excitable, and they're funny, and they become lethargic and slow and slothful, those are signs. Changes in associations, who they're connecting with. If their friend group changes drastically, and it just seems out of character for them to be associated with these people, that's also a warning sign. Responses. To triggers. If there's a disagreement or if there's a stressful moment, and they tend to be a little bit collected, a little bit upset at first, but now they're fired up and they're angry constantly all the time. Those also can be triggers. The closer you are to that person, the more you can notice the triggers because you're intimately involved with how they respond to the daily stimuli. And if that drastically changes, whatever the scenario is, you're probably dealing with an addiction issue.
Got it. And so, and the reason we're asking some of these questions is because we know that families many times have no idea what may be going on with a loved one, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, when they see these erratic behaviors and whatnot. And so with that said, to be able to equip them with the information to be able to recognize these signs so that an early intervention can begin.
Now, I encourage anyone who may be concerned to first just be honest about that reality, because unfortunately when you are closer to someone, your first instinct to think, no, they would never do that.
Right.
That would never be them. That's an instinct we have to dismiss, because it's a possibility. Because of the stigma around addiction, we treat it as though it's a moral failure,
right,
rather than a problem,
right,
a medical, emotional, and mental problem. It's not a moral failure; it's a problem. Just like someone catching a flu or anything else, like it can happen to anybody.
Right, exactly.
So if you treat it with that mentality, then you can look at it honestly,
right,
and say, oh, this isn't. They're not just doing something wrong. There's a problem, because like any other problem, it's been triggered by something.
A healthcare crisis.
Yes.
Got it. What role would you say do genetics and environment play in the development of an addiction, and can addiction be prevented?
Environment plays a gigantic role. It's a massive role. Because environment can go to access, security, monitoring, nurturing, all those things. And if some of those things are neglected, especially in younger people, if nurturing is neglected, or if guidance is neglected, or if there is abuse, unchecked abuse especially, your environment can lend to addiction whether it wants to or not. Okay. It's designed that way. It just can by its nature. I grew up in an environment like that. No one was trying to be addicted.
Right.
But because of the poverty, because of the high crime rates, because of the lack of resource, you were just more likely,
right,
if you didn't have that. So environment plays a great role. Genetics can play something of a role. I mean, addiction can be passed down genetically. That's been medically proven. There's no dispute about that. I think the smarter thing there is to be aware of it. Again, don't treat it like a moral failure. This is part of my genetic makeup. I need to be aware of it. Cancer is passed down genetically. Other diseases are passed down genetically.
Right.
So just be aware of it. I mean, even medically now, we know our genetic markers, our physicians, medical care professionals can help us do things that are preventative. So to answer your question about prevention, it can be prevented. That is something we focus on heavily. Education and transparency and honesty are really the three tools that help you prevent addiction.
And one of the things, I don't know how I or we would be able to implement something like this, but I really believe that from the genetic side of it, when children, I haven't thought about this enough to even know what age this needs to take place, but I wish that schools would have as a part of the curriculum process, to do a brief genetic study on the genetics of your family tree, and when we notate that there is a pattern of great grandfather, great grandfather, grandfather, father had a issue with alcoholism, it is very likely that there is a genetic predisposition in this child to be predisposed to becoming an addict if they were to indulge in drinking. And so my thing is, because we know that when people start out just socially drinking, the goal and the objective is not to become an alcoholic. Really, most of us, I felt that was really impossible for me, although it took place. But I believe that, like as you said, having more education around the preventative measures and some of the signs that families need to look for, the education that they need to give to children at an appropriate age to arm them with the right information to be able to, kind of steer clear of ever getting themselves in a situation where they are overindulging in the use of drugs or alcohol, I think would be very helpful.
It needs to be a more sophisticated dialogue, I think, in parenting and in education. A more sophisticated dialogue about it. Just don't do it. It's not enough of the conversation.
Just say no.
Because you said something very well. There could be three people at a bar drinking, and one of them becomes an alcoholic.
Right.
Because you're genetically predisposed. I'll take it a step further. You could be three people getting high.
Right.
And one person could OD because they're genetically predisposed.
Correct.
So you do need that. The education needs to become, the conversation needs to become more sophisticated around those. So you know what your risk is.
Right.
So a young person can go in knowing what their risk might be. We do it with sexual education, but we don't do it with addiction.
Right. How can mindfulness and meditation practices support recovery from addiction and promote long-term wellness?
They're powerful tools in recovery because one of the first things you need in recovery is stillness. You need to just stop. Your lifestyle, your life patterns, your tendencies and behaviors, they need to just stop for a minute because all of them have to be evaluated because addiction muddies the waters of everything. You don't know where your triggers are. You don't know what it's affected, what damage has been done, or what was damaging to bring you into addiction.
Right.
So you have to pause everything and then evaluate everything. Sometimes that can be a little difficult because some things we're very comfortable and used to are things we have to change. So that meditation and that stillness and then daily, regular meditation and stopping and catching yourself is powerful, a powerful tool because we tend to get back up to speed really quick.
Right.
We start moving and we go from 0 to 90 very quickly.
Very fast.
And we can skip over something that we need to check on. And before we know it, we've relapsed or made a mistake because, I missed that because I wasn't slowing down enough. So that's something we even encourage in Teen Challenges. We call it devotions and quiet time, but you need to stop and look at your day, look at yourself, look at how your attitudes were. That's part of the recovery process. Why did you react that way today?
Right.
Why did you do this? And you realize, well, man, if I'd have kept going down that road, I was going to get high. But you don't do that until you stop and meditate and process not only your education for that day, but your daily responses to know what responses need to change the next day. Very powerful tool.
Excellent. Because I know for myself, I never, when we say mindfulness and we say use the word meditation practices for me, having and for yourself as well, Pastor Gray, that is, having a Christ-centered focus for our life, scripture memorization, daily devotionals, and staying on track with those things and keeping them as a component of my daily life, whether life is going well or whether life is falling apart. That it's needed both because I've noticed for myself that like one of my I'll say my goals for 2025, and I'm still working on this. So it's balance because just like you said, going from 0 to 1,000 is real quick. I'm just trying to learn to be balanced with what we have to do for family life, private time, work, and not let those things kind of bleed over into one another. I think we
all have bad patterns we're trying to avoid. I think addiction is the extreme of those. I think the methodologies are the same, like you're describing. I mean, if as being a Christian, if I didn't spend time in the Word, I wouldn't be a greater Christian.
Right.
But if I were an addict, I would go down a different road because of that.
Exactly.
So I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. You do need those tools and those things in trace, like Scripture and prayer, meditation and community and support, to help you get through recovery, and then engage them deliberately.
Right.
That's the big thing.
On
Do them
purpose.
deliberate. Do them on purpose.
That's right. What are some effective strategies for maintaining sobriety after completing, say, a rehabilitation program like Adult and Teen Challenge? And just maybe just leading up to that, maybe give us a little bit again of what the process for that, the first year, and then how that moves over into I'll call it sober living.
Sure. We've been really focusing on that, especially in our partnership for the last 2 years, because our 1 year is very effective. We split it up into 3 sections, 4 months each. Induction, training, and reentry. Induction is just what it sounds like. It's moving out of that old life, addicted lifestyle, and being inducted into the new one.
Right.
So that's where the meditation practices are coming. That's where the scripture memorization comes in. That's where the prayer time, the community service, and the curriculum that delves into the triggers, why you got addicted in the first place.
Right.
That can take up to 4 to 6 months, depending on the person. Then that second set of 4 months, the training phase, is what we become more individualized with the person.
Right.
Say they're married with 2 kids. That's a different scenario from the young man who's 20-something,
Right.
has nothing.
Got it.
You know, and that he doesn't have kids. He does not marry. He's just taking care of himself. So he may want to go to college. He may want to go into the military. He may want to do something like that. So we start building him up to be able to take that next step. If it's a married guy with 2 kids, he wants to get back with his wife. He's a father. He got to learn how to be a parent. We focus on those things with him. We focus on more immediate deployment for him because he has people to provide for. So it becomes more individualized during that time. But we set up the structure to get him ready and set up the action plan. Then in the reentry phase, we execute the action plan.
Okay.
They start applying to school. They start applying for the military. Or they start working again. Or they start going to marriage counseling. Or they start taking parental studies. Whatever it is for that particular person, they start executing in that reentry phase, which is huge because once you go back into reentry, then the triggers come back.
Got it.
So, and those triggers are going to hit. You're not going to avoid them. They're going to hit. And you may even have a relapse or two. But they're doing it monitored. They're not doing it alone. They're doing it with us right beside them to help them navigate it and learn how to recover and get back up and keep going through that reentry. Going into the sober living piece, they complete that whole year. We celebrate, you did 12 months. Congratulations. Now you're going back into the world. And now we've moved from addiction recovery to sober living. And now in sober living, your community is more important because you have less accountability than you did in the recovery portion. So you have to surround yourself with people on the same journey, going in the same direction. We heavily encourage, as much as painful as it can be, do not go back to your old circle.
Right.
Even if there's wonderful people in it, because there's just too many influences and triggers there, at least at first. So your community is huge. Then your routine is important. How you set up your day. Idle time can be dangerous. So try to have very little of it. So if you're not working, if you're not doing things that are engaged in employment, then have other things, have projects, have hobbies, have things you're working on. Community service is a great component for this. So if you're serving other people, you're not busy thinking about your own thing.
Right.
So your community, your extracurricular, and your daily routine are very important in sobriety, and you can do it, and you're able to do it. And the last thing I will say on that is accountability. Have someone in your world that's able to ask you the hard question: How was today? What happened? Why were you at the bar?
Right, exactly.
And let them ask those questions, because if you know you have that person, you'll think about your answers before you ever ask, and it'll help you make powerful, good decisions.
And be willing to be honest and transparent when those questions, like you said, when they do come. I really also believe that in our recovery process, and I think maybe in one of the other segments we talked about this a little bit, and that is you touched on something that I want to circle back to, and that is relapse, because there is a mindset, there is a family unit, there is a support base that when a person relapses, they view that as the loved one who is going through the recovery process, that they're not sincere, that they're not really trying, that they're really just wanting to to they want to stay in that same pattern of their old lifestyle. What enlighten us just a little bit about the. I've heard this term that relapse is a part of recovery, and so talk about that just a little.
We had to destigmatize relapse, the term, because it's associated so heavily with recovery. People don't realize it's a regular, ongoing part of life. If you set a goal to do something, let's say it's New Year's, everybody sets goals to diet and eat right, and then 3 weeks into that, you said you're going to stay away from pizza, then you have a pizza.
Right.
You relapse.
That's right. Good point.
You relapse. So it's a regular part of life that's been stigmatized. So we have to remove that. Relapse is part of human nature. So you have to recognize that. I mean, even in Christian circles and ministries in the churches, we talk about that. We call it backsliding. We call it other things. But it's a regular part, and the idea is that you get back up.
Right.
Right. And it's not a failure or an indictment on the person's effort to recover.
Right.
It's a setback, and setbacks are part of any process. So accepting relapse as part of the reality is something that's made us actually more useful in recovery, because while it's unfortunate, it's not catastrophic. It can be catastrophic if it goes unchecked. If it's a relapse and then it's not dealt with, and we don't address the triggers and the problems, and then they're just that person just floating out there with that relapse over their head and no tools to respond to it,
right.
You can repeat that again, and then it becomes a pattern all over again.
Right.
But when a relapse happens, we don't freak out.
Exactly.
Okay, it happened. What caused it? What triggered it? What can you do differently? Then we implement the decisions that can be made to do it differently, and treat it as part of the process. You had a year of addiction recovery program. You did great. 3 months in, you had struggle. You relapsed a little bit. Okay, you got back up, and now you're back at it. That's part of the journey. And it actually becomes a great part of the story if you do it right.
Reassess and keep moving forward.
Exactly right.
Yeah. What is the difference between? And I know there's many who struggle with this part. What is the difference between dependence and psychological addiction, physical dependence and psychological addiction, and how do they impact a person's ability to recover?
The difference is one is harder to remove than the other. Physical dependence, I mean, once you detox and you spent time, say in our induction phase, you can go 3, 4, 5 months without, you've gone 3, 4, 5 months without any drugs. Your body has recovered. You'll see the guy start to gain weight. He'll get his muscle tone back. He'll be more athletic if he's in that lane. He's just better. Physically, he's better. His skin color comes back. His countenance raises up. All these things start to happen. Physically, he's better. His body is no longer needing the drug. But psychologically, his brain has learned he hasn't been able to function without it because it's become a coping mechanism. It's become a comfort mechanism. It's become his go-to in any negative circumstance. So you have to retrain your mind, and that just takes longer. It just takes longer. That's why our program is a year long, because it takes longer to retrain your thinking. You have the medical side, the dopamine level issue, and all those things that you can start to recover from. Even some of that's a little physical, and you can start to recover from. But when you have a bad day and someone's really upset you or hurt your feelings, and you're used to running to your addiction to process that, and you don't have that. Now you've not only removed the old tools, you need to install new ones.
Right.
And that takes some time.
Right.
That takes some time. And that can be more, there's more risk of relapse in that regard than there is a physical threat. Again, that's why community is there, because what the community does and what the personal support does it undergirds the emotion. It supports the emotional stability of the person.
Right.
If they're having a bad day and they're crying and they're freaking out and angry, you can become their venting post. You can become their listening board. You can become their carrying mechanism so that they don't need to run to something else or anything else. Now, they're still learning how to do that. They have to be open. They have to be transparent and responding to that community. But that process has begun, and it becomes an excellent, not just substitute, but an excellent replacement for the drug of choice.
And that thing is, I think we've all heard, or many have heard that folks who are addicts are really just they're using drugs and alcohol to medicate their pain, and taking away the medication for the pain without there being any alternative
with the pain.
is extremely that's a volatile situation.
It's brutal,
right? And so some of these dynamics that we're discussing today and the tools needed to walk out a successful recovery process. That's one of the reasons why kind of fostered the idea of being able to have this opportunity for this conversation.
No,
All right.
I appreciate the conversation.
How can lifestyle changes such as diet, exercise, and sleep aid in addiction recovery and contribute to overall wellness?
At Teen Challenge, we have a pretty strict daily schedule, and it implements all of those elements you just described in your question. You have to go to bed at a certain time. You have to get up at a certain time because you see that you need a certain amount of sleep. We discovered that when we interfere with that schedule, guys don't get enough sleep or their sleep pattern is disrupted, they're more likely to be triggered. So you need that pattern. You need that a certain amount of rest because your body and your mind are both in the process of replacing something you've been dependent on with new things, and that takes a lot of energy and a lot of work. I don't want to underestimate or overstate how much work a recovering addict is doing mentally and emotionally and physically. So you need that sleep. Diet's important because lethargy is a threat. If you feel tired and you're dragging and you need a pick-me-up, again, the first thing you go to when you, as an addict, is you go back to yet.
Yep.
So now, while you're learning to use other things as a pick-me-up, you need to minimize the moments where you're down. So, and diet can have a lot to do with that. What you eat, depending on what it is, can accelerate your metabolism or decelerate it. It can make you sleepy. You know, those things. So we try to avoid that. So while we do allow junk food, the guys we kind of on a health kick. Guys don't eat a lot of it because it can be a threat. I mean, even coffee can be a threat. We have to be very careful about those things. So diet and daily schedule are very important to this, and routine is very important to this because you need your rest. You need to know when to start and when to stop whatever you're doing. Addiction blurs everything. So okay, it's time to work, it's time to rest, it's time to play, it's time to stop playing, and it's time to go back to work. So you need all of those things, and you'd be surprised how effective they are at minimizing addictive tendencies.
It is always an absolute pleasure and an eye-opening experience when I get to sit down and talk with you about addiction, and I like to focus on the recovery side of it. But as we continue to come together for these segments on addiction and wellness, I really appreciate you making time to be with us, Reverend Gray, and we look forward to our next installment of Addiction and Wellness.
Thank you.
Thank you.